We have 2 seasons of absolute anarchy to cover, and then we are done talking about Reign. So let's pull up our PowerPoint and just dive right in. We have our cast of characters here. I prefer to talk about the side relationships and side plot lines before we get into that. So, Greer, in the beginning of the season, her relationship with Laith had ended in the previous season, and then going into this season, Mary and Francis hire Martine, who is a pirate privateer, to steal some gold from Scotland. And in repayment, he wants some land and stuff, but he also wants Greer's hand in marriage. Greer and him spend one night together in Greer's attempt to woo him, and she ends up getting pregnant. As the season goes on, she's kind of keeping the pregnancy to herself, and she tries to set up a adoption through her sister and her sister's husband. Unfortunately, they scheme up a blackmail plot line that Greer finds out about and sends them on their way. So she decides to keep the baby for herself. Towards the end of the season, Mary finds out that that Greer has been hiding her pregnancy and offers to get Castleroy out of prison. Remember, he went to prison for being a Protestant rebel, I guess, and being part of the plotline against Francis and Mary. Castleroy ends up getting out of prison, and him and Greer move away from French court with new identities. And Martine is kind of in and out. He wants to have a relationship with his daughter, but he doesn't really care to stay, and so she starts up having a relationship in the 4th season with someone else that we'll talk about when we get there. So during this season, Martine and Castleroy are kind of the big two. And we have Claude. Claude is Catherine's youngest daughter. At the end of last season, Laith became her bodyguard, and they have slowly kind of fallen in love throughout this season, but because Laith is a bodyguard and she's a princess, they can't really be together. They fall in love, but they can't really get married, and so they are working through this season to rise his station so that they can eventually marry. But during this season, Catherine is making a bid for regent after Francis dies, which we'll talk about in the larger plot. But while she's trying to become regent, Narcisse kind of overtakes her in popularity and convinces the Privy Council that he's the better option. And so she sets up a marriage between Claude and an abusive guy to basically oust Narcisse. And so she ends up getting away from the abusive guy, comes back to the castle, and her and Laith start up a romance, and then she finds out about her mother's plot to use her, basically, which causes a rift between them. But her main storyline is with Laith during this season. Then we have Catherine, who is kind of in a three-way, not a three-way relationship, but Catherine, Narcisse, and Lola are all intermingled. Lola is very reluctant to be with Narcisse. She doesn't trust him, and she knows that because he had a previous relationship with Catherine, Catherine's going to turn against her and try to plot against her. Catherine ends up being imprisoned in the beginning of the season and starts what Lola assumes is her threatening her by leaving her leaving her notes and putting a dead rat in her bath and stuff like that. And this kind of pushes Narcisse and Lola together. They do end up getting married after some back and forth with Francis, and Lola finds out that all of the threats that she thought were Catherine were actually Narcisse, and he's been slowly plotting against her during the season. Him and Catherine also start up a little bit of a romance during this time. They're kind of on and off for the rest of the show, but Lola gets word that he's not really that different than who he seemed to be, and he kind of uses her and Francis's child's position to purchase a bunch of land and get himself on the Privy Council to hopefully get the regent position once Francis dies. And Lola finds all of this out, and she leaves and goes to England during a hostage situation to get a bunch of Scottish people released by Elizabeth. She offers to go and live in England as a hostage to kind of get away from Narcisse. Catherine also has a relationship with this guy, Christoph, who is connected to Bash and Delphine's storyline. So in the beginning, at the end of last season, Bash and Delphine kind of had a little bit of a thing, but Delphine was accused of, or suspected of, killing some people in the castle, including like a young boy that she killed while she was trying to do a ritual. In the beginning of the season, Bash is actively trying to find Delphine because he suspects her of murder, and they have this kind of mysterious connection where he can feel what she's feeling through a ritual or a spell that she put on him when she was healing him after that attack that he went through. And so he kind of surmises that she's not actually the one that was killing those people, that there is a serial killer out there, though obviously that term was not used back then. So they start working together to figure out who the killer is. Around this same time, Catherine starts having a sexual relationship with Kristoff. Kristoff was just like a servant guy who caught Catherine's eye one day. They start having sex, and through her relationship gets him put in as a King's Guard. Bash and Laith and all the King's Guard are on the hunt for this killer, and so Kristoff tells Bash that he saw the butcher stealing salt from the bakery's storehouse while Kristoff was having sex with the baker's wife. Kristoff and Bash go to the butcher's shop, and they find like tons of closed up barrels full of salt with dead bodies inside them. They have the butcher hanged. Delphine leaves for the portion of the season, and Bash goes off doing some other things. Well, later on, Delphine comes back to help with another plot line, and she brushes up against Christopher in the hallway and has those like murderous feelings that she had before. He stabs her before she can tell anybody that he's the real killer. Bash finds out that it's him and confronts him, ends up killing him, and while Kristoff is dying, he tells Bash that Catherine knew all along about Kristoff murdering people, and the reason that she didn't turn him in is because he held a secret over her. He found out that she had essentially schemed to win Regent by putting Claude in an abusive marriage to make Narcisse look bad. Bash kills Kristoff. He confronts Catherine about the fact that she essentially set her daughter up to be abused, and also gets Catherine to admit that she killed Diane, which is Bash's mom. She ends up admitting all this, but at the same time that this is happening, Bash is also working on a plot with the 12 or 13 Red Knights. When the killer plotline with Kristoff starts like calming down, they need to fill Bash's time another way, so they set up the idea of the Red Knights, who are a group of like 12 or 13 knights that show up to seek revenge on Catherine because they claimed that she murdered 13 Red Knights back when her and Henry were like in their heyday, and they murdered them because they accused them of being devil worshippers. And Catherine tells Bash that the real reason that they were killed was that Henry owed them money and they didn't want to pay, so they just had them accused of heresy and hanged, and they spiked their heads on the city gates. And so now this group of people are trying to get revenge on Catherine and get Catherine out of the regent position. She ends up having a couple of attacks, and Bash hunts down one of the children of one of the original Red Knights, who tells him that he was recruited by a bunch of dudes trying to get revenge on, while he's talking to that child who's now a grown man, but while he's talking to that offspring, I guess, they end up getting attacked and the dude gets murdered, and Bash takes the guy, the murderer, hostage, and Catherine and Kristoff torture him. And he basically says, like, we are Legion. That was his exact quote. We are Legion. This is not the end. We're going to take you down. We're going to take down the entire Valois line. Kind of appease their military, Catherine and Charles set up a meeting with all of the generals because the Red Knights had all of their generals killed and spiked, just like they say that she did to the Red Knights back in the day. And this pisses the generals off because they think it's because Catherine didn't want to pay them again. And so to appease the generals, she holds a dinner for all of them. They end up getting poisoned by the Red Knights, and they call in Delphine, Charles, Narcisse, Mary, all of them band together to cover up this murder. And then it goes into like the actual plot of the story, like the main plot of Catherine's story. So we'll talk about that a little bit later on. At the end of the season, Bash does end up deciding to go with Mary to Scotland when she eventually makes her way at the end of the season, because he's still in love with Mary. Before we talk about Elizabeth, because I have a whole rant, we'll talk about Mary. So obviously Mary and Francis are still together. Francis dies, I think 4 to 6 episodes into this season, and so she of course has a romance. She ends up sparking up a romance with this guy named Blackburn, who is an English advisor, basically in like an official capacity, but he's really there because Elizabeth wants him to make Mary fall in love with him so that she won't marry another person and potentially strengthen her claim to the English throne. Well, Blackburn and her do end up falling in love. All right, so let's talk about Elizabeth because in season 3 and 4, Elizabeth is set up as this antithesis, arch enemy to Mary, this person that we understand to basically be Mary for England, but her and Mary are always destined to be enemies purely because of their bloodlines. They both have claims to the English throne through their great grandfather, Henry VIII, I believe. And so the season is kind of pitched, the last 2 seasons are kind of pitched as Mary being the queen in Scotland, Elizabeth being the queen in England, and Catherine being the queen in France. And it's supposed to present this like strong queenly dynamic for the end of the season, the end of the series. Well, that's all well and good, but they absolutely butcher Elizabeth's character in the 3rd and 4th season, unfortunately. So if you remember correctly, Catherine at the end of season 2 was exiled from France, and they really were going to imprison her and basically kill her. And so she runs away and she goes to England to work with Elizabeth to take down Mary, because she still believes that Mary will be the death of Francis. The first couple of episodes, Catherine is in England and they're plotting away, which is all well and good. The way that they butcher Elizabeth's character cannot be explained other than me telling you the real historical person that was Elizabeth. She was the longest reigning Tudor line queen. She never married. She was called the Virgin Queen, and there was something of a cult personality around Elizabeth as being a virgin, as being a queen ruling on her own without a king. During her time, the actual Elizabeth's time, she brought a reign of peace to England that England had not seen up until her or after her. Religious tolerance between the Protestants and the Catholics. She herself was a Protestant, but she also brought the country up under the Elizabethan Reformation that essentially created a smoother ride, Protestantism taking over the country. At this time, Spain and France were really struggling with civil wars and infighting between their countries and in their countries because of religion, because the Vatican wanted a stronger hold over countries. A lot of people were still Catholic, and this wave of Protestantism was hitting these countries hard, causing a lot of fighting between the people. But Elizabeth kind of assuaged that. She ruled very tolerantly to religion. She ruled by basically what her people wanted. She really was a queen of the people. She considered the people her husband, and she realized that in order to successfully rule England, she had to be popular with the people. Defensive strategy-wise, there was this push during her reign to explore other parts of the country, particularly the New World, and expand the English country in that way, the English rule in that way. But largely, she avoided all-in-all-out war with France and Spain. Her reign was really quite peaceful, and it made way for a lot of influential English art that we still consume and talk about today. She really shaped England's identity that has carried on for years and decades and up until present day. There is known history about her relationship with a guy named Robert Dudley. However, her identity of being a virgin was at the time idolized. A lot of people comparing her to the Virgin Mary, but her dissenters did not necessarily trust that she was a virgin. And as you can imagine, a Protestant queen with no king, obviously the Vatican and the Catholics really pushed back on it. And so the large dissenting opinion was that she wasn't actually a virgin because she allegedly had a relationship with this guy named Robert Dudley, who she knew from childhood. And they supposedly she got pregnant from him. But most historians have agreed that it would be really unlikely for her to be able to give birth or get rid of the fetus without anybody noticing. So most historians have kind of gotten rid of that theory, but at the time there were dissenters who claimed that she wasn't really a virgin. She's known for prosperity and peace, and she's known for a time when the government, when the crown and the churches and all of that worked really well together. So all of that being said, she, by all accounts, was a pretty moderate queen, and they could have taken so many opportunities to make something that a lot of young girls hadn't seen at that time, which was a main character who a female main character who portrayed their strength in a way that wasn't through men, that wasn't through love. And I understand that, like, yes, we're watching CW shows because we want to see hot people kiss. But I think because Mary and Catherine and all of these other people had these side plot lines of romance, keeping Elizabeth a true, like, virgin queen, truly focusing on all of the good that she was doing in her country at that time, would have been so much better than what they did. So let's go into her role in season 3. Like I said, we see her plotting with Catherine in the beginning of the season, but Catherine ends up getting captured by Mary and Francis in the beginning of the season and goes back to France. So she doesn't really have that much influence. Elizabeth's Privy Council gets word that she has been plotting with Catherine to bring Mary down and that the Vatican isn't happy about it. So they kind of squash Elizabeth's attempts to bring Mary down. And this leads her to basically just have a bunch of romance plots throughout the season, mainly with Robert Dudley and Amy Dudley, who is Robert Dudley's wife. Robert Dudley and Elizabeth were childhood friends. They were locked in the same tower together when Bloody Mary was the reigning queen. She was fearful of Elizabeth's claim to the throne, so she imprisoned Elizabeth until her death, and then Elizabeth obviously took over, but they were imprisoned together. And since then, they've basically been in love, but Elizabeth's virginity is a large part of her reputation and really any queen's reputation at this time. And so she couldn't be caught having sex with someone else. And he's married. Like, he's married to Amy Dudley. Amy pretty much immediately from the beginning of the season knows about his affair with Elizabeth and his love for Elizabeth, but she's a schemer. She schemes to ruin Elizabeth's reputation, to oust their affair, to get him moved away, to claim that she's ill so that they have to move away, and none of it really works. She ends up, I think it's in either the 4th season or the 3rd season, she ends up committing suicide as like an act of revenge because their affair really doesn't end. But most of Elizabeth's scenes are her secretly hooking up with Dudley, trying to get him to be with her, trying to convince him that they can be together, that they can have children together. She gets pregnant and then loses the baby. So the way that I am talking about Elizabeth's character, it makes it sound like she only has romance plot lines in this season, and that's basically true. She has a couple of plot lines of her meeting with other nobles, other princes and kings, get married and talk about courtship, but nothing really pans out. She has a side plot with the Prince of Spain, Don Carlos, and that doesn't really work out because he's heard rumors that Amy has been spreading, and they have like a bad encounter. Then she has the betrayal of her advisor Cecil, who is in love with her. She obviously doesn't love him, but largely she has no plot lines until the end of the season when Lola arrives. So, like I mentioned, Lola has come to England to be a hostage to Elizabeth for Mary, and she ends up getting pretty close to Elizabeth. She is technically spying on Elizabeth for Mary, and she like sends her letters with their military trade routes and things like that, but they end up actually genuinely becoming friends. Unfortunately, this doesn't end particularly well for Lola because she gets a letter from someone that she thinks is Mary at the end of the season, telling her that there is an assassination plot against Elizabeth. There is someone inside the English castle that she wants Lola to work with to assassinate Elizabeth. Elizabeth finds out about this plot and has Lola executed in front of Narcisse, who has found out that Lola is set to be executed and travels to England. He begs in official capacity to have Lola released. Elizabeth refuses to and assassinates her or executes her in front of him. That's really it as far as her major plot lines in the season, and the reason that I wanted to set up with talking about the real life Elizabeth is because especially in season 4, like in season 3 she has a couple of plot lines, but in season 4 she is not a main player in the series, which is so upsetting because of the build-up. And we'll talk about the last episode of the entire series and why it's one of the most disappointing 45 minutes in television history of all time. But I wanted to set up Elizabeth's character with the actual truth of who Elizabeth was so that you could see some of the potential in her character and why this 15 minutes conversation about all of her plot lines just does not do credit to what they actually could have done with her character. That being said, let's just get into the actual meat and potatoes of the series. Let's talk about the plot lines. All right, so technically we're going to start with episode 2 because episode 1 is basically what we already talked about with Catherine and Elizabeth trying to get Catherine back to France, Catherine plotting with Elizabeth to get rid of Mary, whatever. At the end of episode 1, they capture Catherine, they bring her back to France. So in episode 2, Mary is trying to convince Francis to kill Catherine, but he refuses. Mary is not pregnant, and Francis decides that the safest path is to marry Mary to Charles, and he starts putting people in place for when he passes. Mary is initially very resistant to the idea of marrying Charles because her and Francis have had this love match forever, and they're deeply in love, and she knows that she will never have that love with Charles, and like it's his brother. It's kind of weird. But he is forced to tell her about the fact that he is dying, and she is obviously devastated. So they work together to put all the pieces in place to set up France for his passing. They tell Claude, Bash, and Charles, who is Francis's younger brother, about his passing. After Charles is told that Francis is going to die, he takes it very, very hard, and he tries to assert his identity as a king. He starts learning how to become a king from Francis, but Francis is weakening. So Charles reaches out to Catherine, who is still imprisoned and might possibly be executed at any moment. Catherine starts weaving her web. She finds out that Francis is dying and they won't release her, so she starts to try to get in good with Charles. She tells Charles to find a guy named Tremaine and tell him to get a full account of the realm's financials. So Charles reaches out to Tremaine, but Tremaine is not an accountant. He's actually a hired killer ready to spill Bourbon blood. Just a reminder, the Bourbons are Anton and Condé. They have a direct blood tie to the French throne, but Mary and Francis manage to intercept Tremaine before he assassinates the family. And this basically, for the moment, turns Charles against Catherine. Charles agrees to Mary to keep France running like Francis has been running it because he's been a very good king. Episode 3 is where the pain truly begins. Francis's health collapses fast, and the whole court kind of knows that something is going on. Mary tries working with Charles to prepare for the transition, but he's, again, very uninterested and immature. And Antoine Bourbon arrives to negotiate Condé's safe passage after his failed coup, and is pushed to sign away his claim to the throne by Mary, which he refuses. Side note, I thought that this already happened whenever he came to, like, brush the Condé stuff aside. I thought they had him sign away his rights to the throne, but I guess not. At the same time, an emissary that Elizabeth had sent to France, a guy by the name of Nicholas, offers Anton a military backing and gold if he will not make this deal with Mary. Bash overhears Nicholas and Anton having this meeting, and so Mary and Francis sick Catherine on him, and Catherine basically goes all wild queen, all like protective mama bear on him. Mary and Francis confront Anton again. Francis basically starts threatening him, says that he will come after Navarre if he takes an alliance with England, and during this confrontation, Francis starts bleeding from his ears, and Anton figures out that he's sick. He's been hearing these rumors that Francis is away. They've been pushing off Francis's presence because Francis keeps collapsing, and during a ball that Anton is at, Francis just doesn't seem very well. During that ball, there is a very, very, very sad scene of Francis and Mary having a final dance together that's very sweet. That definitely did not make me cry. But back to this meeting, Francis starts to bleed out. And Anton works out that Francis is sick. So he basically is like, yeah, I'm not taking your deal, and if you're sick, like, I'm gonna move in on France as soon as I want. And Francis stabs Anton's guard, blood just dripping down his face. Francis is like, yeah, no, that's not going to happen. I'm going to fight you with my very last breath. I will take you down. I will use all of my soldiers to absolutely obliterate Navarre, and I'll have a grudge against you until the day that I die, and I will never stop. And this basically convinces Anton to back the fuck off and sign away his claim. During this, Nicholas is also sending back messages to Elizabeth because he and everybody else has found out that Francis is dying. Or he tells Francis and Mary that he's going to send a message to Elizabeth to up the ante in Scotland, to send more troops, to work harder because France, which is Scotland's strongest ally, is weak because Francis is dying. And again, Francis goes hard with him and is basically like, again, I will absolutely destroy you, and I will do everything in my power to make sure that you go down before I die. Mary decides not to marry Charles after seeing the way that Francis has protected her, because again, she knows that she will never have the sort of romance or the sort of love with Charles that she had with Francis, and she also knows that Charles doesn't really have any obligation towards Scotland, and any alliance that Scotland has with France right now is likely going to end whenever Francis dies, and so she is of the mindset that it's best for her in Scotland if she marries somebody else with, another country with power, and kind of makes a break from France. She ends up getting a letter from one of Catherine's spies saying that the Prince Don Carlos of Spain is currently looking for a wife, and she kind of assumes that this is her best move. They end up releasing Catherine from prison because Mary convinces Francis that if Mary is not staying in France to take care of France, that they should have Catherine rule as regent, because for 99.999% of their history, Catherine has gone above and beyond to protect her children, and they know that she's gonna do whatever she needs to make sure that the Valois line is successful. So they release her, and Catherine and Mary kind of make up in this episode, and their friendship is actually very sweet through the rest of the season, but Catherine admits that she did find out about Don Carlos for her, and they kind of come together during Francis's failing health. In the beginning of episode 4, Francis seems to be improving due to a new medication, But the political situation keeps worsening. Mary gets a coded letter from Scotland that a supply route has been taken by English troops and they need help by sea. And France's warships sent to Scotland are sunken by English ships. Mary tries diplomacy with Nicholas, but he admits England is stalling until Francis dies. Mary counters by planting a letter Nicholas steals, which misdirects English troops and costs them ground. Francis collapses, falls from his horse, and dies in bed with Mary holding him. In a even more cruel turn, Charles hires Delphine to save Francis's life. Francis is in his bed dying. Him and Mary are cuddling, creating memories of what their future would have looked like with their children and naming their children and calling out specific memories of like reading together and running in the park and things like that. And as they're laying there, Francis takes his last breath. Delphine, Charles, and Bash rush into the room, but Francis is dead. Mary begs Delphine to bring Francis back to life and says that she will pay any price, even if it is her own life. Delphine basically recites some words over his body and he comes gasping back to life. And at the same time, in Scotland, Marie de Guise, who is Mary's mother, dies. Episode 5, Francis seems healthy, but Scotland becomes unstable after Marie de Guise's death, and Mary wants to appoint James as acting regent. James is her brother. Elizabeth offers a peace treaty through Nicholas. She'll pull the soldiers from Scotland if Mary abdicates her direct claim to the English throne, and after much argument, Mary agrees. Nostradamus briefly returns to French court to again warn that the vision of the glowing tree in spring with blood dripping from its petals has not come to pass, and he insists that the visions must be heeded or Francis will die. They, of course, tell Francis and Mary about this, but he ignores this. Then Mary and Francis decide that they're going to go away for a weekend or something like that, and they have a picnic at the lakeside. They do some skinny dipping, and they have a romantic picnic. But while Mary is going back to the carriage to get their picnic basket, she gets kidnapped. She is taken by assassins to a portion of the woods with a white glowing tree. Francis hasn't been feeling particularly well during this excursion, but he hears Mary yelling and he finds her in the woods. Him and the assassins start fighting and he ends up getting killed. Catherine, Bash, and Nostradamus find Mary clutching Francis's body. Catherine eventually convinces Mary to let go of Francis's body, and the King's Guard and Nostradamus cart him away. Mary completely breaks down and blames Elizabeth. She tears up the accord between Elizabeth and herself, abdicating her throne, and Francis's funeral follows, and Narcisse reveals that the captured assassin, the only one that was left, was a Scottish Protestant extremist. Catherine receives a final prophecy that only with Mary's help will Catherine rule France. Mary gives Catherine her crown and steps down to hopefully find a meaningful and resourceful alliance. She is offered a place in France by Charles to find suitors, but going forward, she really doesn't have much say over what happens in France. 3 weeks later, Charles is king, kind of, and the court turns predatory. Mary is consumed in grief and treated like an outsider, and Catherine's grief pulls her away from the council until Mary forces her back into action. Catherine returns in full force, dismantling Regency opposition, and the Privy Council moves up the Regency vote without approval. Catherine realizes France's alliance with Scotland is turning the nobles against her, and to win the Regency vote, she would need to bring the troops back home from Scotland. She refuses at first, but Mary takes the public hit. She ends Francis's duty to Scotland and frames it as Catherine's influence, and the council bows to Catherine. Privately, Mary and Catherine grieve together and discuss Mary returning to Scotland. During this time, they really lean heavily on each other. In episode 7, Mary and Don Carlos negotiate and seem to get along, but it's obvious that he'll push her boundaries. At the same time, Blackburn arrives and immediately starts flirting with Mary, and Mary learns that Elizabeth pulled troops from Scotland but keeps forces at the border, making it seem like they're currently at peace, but she's really ready to move in at any time. Blackburn ends up blackmailing Don Carlos into leaving, ending Mary's Spanish prospects, but Catherine urges Mary to keep trying. Mary has Don Carlos's luggage hidden in the tunnels to keep him from getting away, and also because she kind of suspects that he's hiding something and learns his sexual demands are part of how he intends to control his marriage, or seek control, or give up control, I guess, in the marriage. It doesn't go particularly well at first, but Catherine kind of pushes Mary to give it a chance because Don Carlos seems to be her best bet. During the Regency vote, Bishop interrupts with claims that Francis was poisoned. They accuse Catherine of poisoning him based on the state of his lungs and his vital organs, and they claim that only someone with Catherine's knowledge of poison could have poisoned the body in that way. And so while the Regency vote is up in the air because Catherine is being accused of killing their previous king, Narcisse steps up and valiantly offers to take over. In desperation, Catherine tries to fix the Don Carlos situation by taking over a sexual encounter meant for Mary. Has like this chair that he wants to be tied to and whipped, and they blindfold him, and he ends up figuring out that the person actually whipping him is not Mary, it's Catherine, and he thinks that they're like setting him up for something or making fun of him. And so in a rage, he kind of like tips the chair to try to get out, and he falls back and hits his head. And so Mary and Catherine like turn around and they're like discussing what they should do, and he manages to get up and leave and escape. And episode 8 starts with them escaping through the underground tunnels and trying to destroy evidence. And at the same time as all of this is going on, Narcisse starts an inquisition into who poisoned Francis. And he sends Charles away, and he piles like a ton of charges onto Catherine. And Narcisse interrogates Claude and reads her diary aloud during Catherine's inquisition, and they find out that Catherine set up Claude to be in that abusive relationship, and Catherine is formally charged for Francis's death. Mary and Catherine manage to smuggle Catherine out of the castle disguised as a boy, and Bash finds evidence that the embalming story, the person that accused Catherine or accused someone of poisoning Francis, is lying. Catherine returns with Francis's body to prove it was never cut open, collapsing the poisoning narrative. Meanwhile, starving Scottish lords arrive in France, begging Mary to return to stabilize their country. So Mary sells jewels and continues to pursue Spain to feed Scotland. Mary becomes officially engaged to Don Carlos, and Spain sends Scotland grain. And we find out that the Vatican planted the poison and fed Narcisse Claude's diary. Episode 9, Mary is using Don Carlos to finance Scotland, while Narcisse is using him for his Spanish money. He made a recovery from his injury, but he seems to have suffered a cognitive injury that has left him with little to no memories, and they're really using that against him. Don Carlos secretly recovers his memories, but sets up a scheme to take Scotland out from under Mary by getting Mary to agree to a crown matrimonial, which would essentially give him right to Scotland should Mary die. Mary, being the ever all-knowing, omnipotent, intelligent woman that she is, kind of figures out that Don Carlos is lying, and with Blackburn's help, Mary exposes Don Carlos and breaks the engagement, while, of course, not triggering a full-on war with Spain. Catherine banishes Narcisse and threatens to expose him if he tries to weaponize Spain against them through the Don Carlos stuff. In episode 10, Narcisse is not swayed by Catherine's exile in any way and manages to gain influence over Charles and turn him against Scotland and Catherine. He accuses Catherine of stealing gold meant for Claude's marriage, and Mary receives a letter from Lola that Elizabeth won't release the Scottish prisoners that Lola went to England to release. Mary intercepts Blackburn's letters and learns that he was ordered to seduce her, plus he has watchers tracking her. She flips the situation and agrees to play along so she can protect Lola. Episode 11, Charles's coronation happens, and Catherine demands a spectacle despite France not being in the best place. In Scotland, a man by the name of John Knox seems to be raising Protestant rebels against her and threatening Mary's rule. Mary learns that Knox has taken Edinburgh and demands she convert to Protestantism or never return, and Mary seeks out Vatican support. Mary returns from Rome and tells Catherine that the Vatican will support her, but it's clearly conditional. Narcisse gives Catherine a confession from the embalmer claiming bribery by a cardinal. Elizabeth offers to name Mary her successor, but only if Mary accepts Elizabeth's superiority and marries a man Elizabeth chooses. Mary and Catherine realize that the Vatican is using Mary as a pawn. They want Mary blamed for Elizabeth's death and put another Catholic king on the throne. Elizabeth ends up sending Dudley to France as Mary's future husband. In episode 13, he arrives and Mary and he bond over duty and loss, and they become engaged. Mary continues her secret relationship with Blackburn, and she tells Blackburn about John Tudor, the Vatican's likely replacement plan for when Mary gets accused of Elizabeth's death. Blackburn kidnaps Joseph Tudor and steals the letter proving the Vatican's scheme. Blackburn is arrested, and Catherine warns Mary that Elizabeth will blame her no matter what, so they use Dudley. Dudley brings evidence to Elizabeth, and Elizabeth resends the succession offer and refuses to name a successor unless she has an heir. The Vatican targets Blackburn, and Catherine proposes a prisoner swap. Blackburn for General Gagan, which is a French general. Elizabeth agrees to the swap largely to hurt Mary to take Blackburn away, thinking that Mary is in love with Blackburn, which she is. Episode 14 is where General Gagan returns, and in episode 15, the Red Knights try to attack the castle, and Mary uses her army that she was going to take to Scotland to save them, and then goes on her way to Scotland. In episode 16, Mary lands in Scotland after her ship is sunk, and Narcisse manages to save her, and while a band of rogue clansmen are scavenging their boat, a group of druids intervene and take Bash, an injured Bash, back to their land. Narcisse and Mary follow Bash and the druids back to their camp, and they find out that Scotland is fractured. This group, called the Wolvers, are anti-monarch revolutionists who are going around to different territories and stealing money and resources. And during this time, the camp is attacked by the Wolvers. Mary recognizes an insignia linked to Francis's assassins during this Wolvers attack and uses the Wolvers to reach Monroe McFay, who is the leader of the Wolvers and presumably hired the assassins that killed Francis. In France, Charles builds a spy council to undermine Catherine, and a weapons stockpile in Orsay suggests that the Red Knights are organizing. Charles is taken hostage during a attack on the Red Guards, and one of his friends on that spy council turns against him and taken hostage. In episode 17, Mary and Bash reach Monroe's territory, and he reveals that he knows Mary's true identity and blames him for his family ruins. During a scuffle, Mary kills Monroe using a necklace and Francis's sword, and then escapes with Bash. John Knox tells James, Mary's brother, that Mary is dead and pushes him to resolve the monarch and install Darnley, who is a Catholic dude that has rights to the throne. Mary storms into the Scottish council meeting covered in blood and claims her throne, and Catherine rides out to trade herself for Charles, but it's a trap. His friend that turned against him finds out that they plan to kill Charles anyways, and he manages to free him. In episode 18, Mary tries to rule Scotland but faces clan power and the Protestant lords of the congregation. John Knox demands that she converts and steps down from being queen, and Mary refuses, reopens the Catholic Church, and shuts Knox down publicly. Mary learns in this final episode that Lola was executed, and Knox all but confesses that he set it up, pretending to be Mary. And in France, Charles is back from being a hostage, but he is basically rebelling against the idea of being a king. He's undergone a lot, and his trauma is really showing up. He pushes a vote to declare himself of age and remove Catherine. They end up going after the Red Knights at Charles's behest, and during the ensuing conflict, Leith is stabbed. And the season ends with Mary asking Blackburn to spy on England with the end goal of her taking the throne. That is the end of season 3. I usually go like scene by scene and tell you every little thing that happened, but because we're going through 2 seasons at once, I condensed a lot of it down into kind of short summaries, because there's a lot here, and this is going to be a long video. So season 3 really did not have a ton of stuff going on. It mostly focused on Francis in the beginning. Obviously his death, it's very emotional. I definitely cried during the episode where he dies, and it's really hard to watch Mary's characters. It's 100% that the Adeline Kane, the dude that plays Francis, and the woman that plays Catherine are the strongest actors in the show. And so seeing the love scenes between Mary and Francis, seeing them have to say goodbye, seeing the grief after Francis dies is just so emotional. It's so heavy to watch. And the show arguably gets significantly worse after Francis's death, and it's noticeable with how like the plot lines just start to just be way too much. So that being said, that was season 3. Overall, I would say this season is way more beautiful. It's very, very vibrant. In the first 2 seasons, we definitely had the beautiful gowns and the grand setting. It's very dark, very dungeony, but in this season they really stepped it up. It's like beautiful to watch, and the contrast is definitely stark. But that is season 3. So let's talk about season 4. So as you can tell by the side relationships slide, there's quite a bit going on during this season. So we'll start with Greer again. Greer and Castleroy's relationship breaks up kind of halfway through this season. Martine shows up wanting to be in his daughter's life, but mostly Greer's plot lines are centered around supporting Mary in her efforts to rule Scotland, and also a budding relationship with James, who is Mary's brother, and a Protestant who kind of helps her bridge the gap between the Catholics and the Protestants. And he has a relationship with a woman named Emily Knox, who is John Knox's wife. They quickly surmise that if James were to get in romantically with Emily Knox, who is heavily abused by her husband, they could, snoop through his things and find out what he's doing. So he convinces Emily to cheat with him and uses the time that they have sex to go through John Knox's stuff, and it really gives them an opportunity to find out a lot of things that he's doing and kind of end some of the stuff that he does. Another side relationship during this season is Claude, who Narcisse makes marry Luke Narcisse, who is his son, and she still is very much in love with Leith. During the beginning of the season, when she's getting married to Luke, she thinks that Leith is dead. He ends up returning and going away again, but she's still very much pining for him. It's clear that Luke is a genuinely good guy, despite his dad being Narcisse, and really likes Claude and could love her one day, but he recognizes that she's in love with Leith and the chances of her getting past that and moving on with him are pretty slim, and so he really pushes her to explore the relationship with Leith, asks multiple times for their marriage to be annulled, but he ends up being a good husband. He ends up supporting Charles in many, many ways, and there's just not a ton there with Claude's character, which is unfortunate. All right, and then we have Elizabeth's character. This is all of her plot lines. It's all romance, basically. So Mary is like actively trying to get Scotland in reign and take over England. She's making tons of plans, but Elizabeth isn't really doing much. During this season, in the beginning, she's still trying to find someone to have a courtship with, someone to have a relationship with, but she starts getting closer to Blackburn, who is back in England full-time, and through his daughter and his daughter's eventual death, they get really, really close, and then they have a relationship. She ends up forming a alliance with the Archduke of Austria, and they're really, really close to getting married. He knows about Blackburn. He knows that she's in love with Blackburn. Blackburn eventually gets poisoned, and Elizabeth thinks that it is the Archduke, so she sinks some of his warships. This doesn't go particularly well for their alliance, but she ends up eventually calling off the alliance towards the end of the season when she realizes that she actually doesn't need to get married because of some of Mary's decisions later on in the season. But that's it as far as her plots go. Like, she really is doing nothing. She has some minor plot lines with her naval commander where she's like having him butt up against Spain. She sends a pirate. She hires a pirate to go to the New World to explore and bring her back information. But other than that, she's not doing much. And then we have the last side relationship before we get to Mary, which is the four-way situation with Narcisse, Nicole, Charles, and Henry. The beginning of the season, Charles is not doing very well, and he manages to escape, and he finds himself on a farm with Nicole and her family. Catherine and Narcisse convince Nicole to convince Charles to come back to the castle and rule as king because Nicole is really power hungry and wants to ascend or whatever. And she recognizes that like Charles is very weak and she can manipulate him, but she ultimately starts up a relationship with Narcisse, who through Catherine's alliance, he and her are using Nicole to keep Charles in check. Halfway through the season, Henry shows up to try to overthrow Charles and starts up a romantic relationship with Nicole. So they all kind of are in it together. And then that little itty bitty tiny picture over Narcisse is Jane, who is Elizabeth's handmaiden or lady's maid. And Narcisse plays a long con on Elizabeth to basically get Elizabeth, he tries to ruin all of Elizabeth's relationships through Jane by like poisoning Blackburn and doing a ton of other things against Elizabeth to like get her back for killing Lola. But those are the side relationships aside from Mary, but we'll talk about Mary in the larger plot. And we have a little itty bitty photo of Francis because, let's be real, they're like really the only romance that matters. Mary starts season 4 setting up a courtship with Lord Darnley. He has a claim to the English throne and he's Catholic. James urges Mary not to marry yet and focus on winning the power of the clans. Mary arrives in Scotland for Lola's funeral, and Mary confides how alone she feels and how little she trusts James' judgment, even though he's been running Scotland since Marie de Guise died. On the way back from the funeral, Mary is drugged and kidnapped, and James quickly suspects a northern Catholic ally, Clan Gordon, and when Mary wakes, the clan leader offers a bargain. Their protection from the Protestant rebels in exchange for Mary marrying the clan leader's son. At the same time, James is forced to involve Knox and essentially offers him the clan's elimination. Knox wants the clan out of the way because they are influential Catholic supporters of Mary. Mary refuses the forced marriage at first, but the clan threatens to turn on her, so she's cornered into agreeing. And when she meets with the son, He's shy and terrified, and Mary uses the moment to intimidate him, creating an opening and escaping on horseback. Mary runs into James's men to slaughter the entire clan. Mary takes command of the soldiers herself and rides back, forcing the clan to bend the knee instead of being wiped out. She orders James to execute the clan leader as a political move that removes a threat, stains James' hands in Catholic blood, and keeps Mary's image clean. Then she stops the slaughter and offers the clan their land and writes back if they swear loyalty to her, which they do. Knox is furious that Mary strengthened Catholic power instead of eliminating it, and he threatens James. Blackburn tells Mary Knox was behind Lola's death, and James admits he knew about the conspiracy, and this confirmation further hardens Mary's resolve, and she recommits to marrying Darnley. In England, Elizabeth interrogates Lady Lennox, who is Darnley's mother, and threatens them both. Blackburn pushes Elizabeth to stop Darnley from reaching Mary, and meanwhile, Blackburn and Narcisse connect the nanny to Lola's death and learn that she has Lola's son, John. Blackburn rushes to retrieve John. The nanny initially refuses to name who killed Lola's death, but Blackburn deduces that it is John Knox, and he gets John back, and the nanny is killed, and he brings John back to Narcisse and tells him that Knox ultimately ordered Lola's death. Elizabeth refuses to believe that Mary is innocent in the assassination attempt against her and refuses to move against Knox. She frees Narcisse and allows him to return to France with John, and in France, Catherine faces Spain's pressure through Lisa, who arrives to judge Catherine and Charles and to push Spain's agenda. Lisa tries to force Claude into a match with Martel de Guise, and Catherine refuses to risk Spain's wrath, which traps Claude. When Claude realizes Martel is tied to Lace's disappearance, Catherine chooses violence and hangs Martel, reporting it as a suicide. Lisa stays in France anyway, making it clear that Spain intends to meddle directly. Lisa, for the record, is Catherine's oldest daughter, who married the King of Spain in the first episode of the series. In episode 2, Scotland is under direct pressure. Soldiers brutalize a messenger carrying gunpowder as a warning, and England lays siege to a border town, cutting supplies. Mary suspects someone within her party is leaking strategy, and she throws a political trap disguised as a social event. At a party with her generals' wives, Mary plants false information to see what leaks. The plan works, and they identify the leak running through a wife to a local blacksmith. Elizabeth uses Knox's presence to entrap him. She uses Narcisse to gain Knox's trust and tries to provoke a treason plot. Knox begins gathering supporters, and Elizabeth responds with a massacre order when she discovers English nobles moving to meet him. Knox is exiled instead of executed, and Narcisse is denied justice. In France, Lisa continues to humiliate Charles and undermine Catherine. Charles's instability really becomes obvious during this episode. Catherine finds him bleeding out and spiraling, and the episode ends with Charles reaching for ink with completely bloodied hands, suggesting something darker is building. In England, Lady Lennox forces Darnley to go to Scotland. Blackburn proposes a wild solution. Elizabeth should bless Blackburn's marriage to Mary. He pitches a deal where Mary would step down, move to England as a commoner, and their child would be named Elizabeth's successor. Mary actually considers it for her part until James points out that no Scot will ever believe that Mary surrendered Scotland willingly, which would ultimately result in further war. A party is thrown to display Mary and Blackburn's love, and Darnley crashes it. Lady Lennox stays behind and quietly warns Mary that the castle Elizabeth offered in Kent for Blackburn and Mary to move into is reinforced as a prison, and Mary's spies confirm it. Mary rejects Blackburn's proposal and pivots back to Darnley. Blackburn leaves with a warning that Mary's death is near, and back in England, Blackburn confronts Elizabeth. Elizabeth drops the mask. She claims protection, but makes it clear she will keep hurting Mary. In France, Narcisse returns with John. Catherine reveals Lisa's plan to replace Narcisse as Lord Chancellor, and Spain has sent a cardinal as the replacement. Catherine and Narcisse move to eliminate him. Meanwhile, Charles grows increasingly unhinged, and Narcisse sends Bianca to lift his spirits, which she's like a noble's woman that they send for him to have sex with. Instead of him just fucking her and then moving on, he ends up taking her out into the woods, showing her some dead bodies and just like leaving her there. Narcisse and Catherine attempt to eliminate the cardinal by poisoning him to further worsen his already existing medical conditions, and he's in the court's church praying at the same time that Claude is praying, and he has like a fit and passes out on the floor. Claude leans over him to help him, and some of her tears fall onto his body and seemingly like bring him back to life. And so the cardinal claims that Claude is blessed, and Catherine fully uses this to manipulate the situation. In episode 4, Bianca is found injured in the woods, and rumors explode that Charles is a necrophiliac. Catherine and Narcisse try to force Charles back into public function, but he refuses to speak and stays in bed, only saying that Bianca is lucky to be alive. In Scotland, Darnley arrives at the place that Mary is vacationing at, and he's very cocky, but he and Mary align on ambition. They want to marry and take over England. Knox preaches at a starving Catholic village to turn them against Mary, and Mary counters by bringing food and showing up in person to lift their spirits. Knox, in a fit of rage, burns the village anyway, and Mary's bravery only endears her to the people. Darnley rescues a child during a second fire, and Mary receives a letter from the loyal watchman warning that Darnley likely set it to look heroic for the people. In episode 5, in Scotland, Mary hosts the Highland Games and plans to announce her marriage to Darnley and her intent to take England. In episode 6, Mary and Darnley's courtship turns physical, and it looks like they might actually be enjoying each other until English diplomats arrive demanding Darnley return to Elizabeth. Elizabeth escalates and sends forces through Edinburgh, and Mary suspects assassination rather than diplomacy. A loyal watchman letter warns an assassin arrived days earlier, and Mary and James realize England may have forced them to move Darnley just to make him an easier target. The assassin reaches Darnley first and kills his guards, but Darnley survives and kills the attacker. Mary drags the English diplomat publicly, throws the assassin's body at his feet, and forces them out under threat. Kira arrives, cloaked, begging Darnley to take her back. Kira is this woman. She is Darnley's ex-lover, who Elizabeth had their marriage ruined when Elizabeth was trying to get with him. In episode 7, Elizabeth gets the assassin's body back and orders her diplomat to find a reason to kill Mary. Mary prepares for marriage and begins transferring James's land to Darnley as required, and James warns her Darnley is not the kind of person to rule beside. Kira is secretly in the castle, and Darnley is panicking. He tries to end the relationship with her, but Kira forces herself into his space, and they end up sleeping together. Mary negotiates with a lord named Bothwell for a port to offset James' losses for his land that was turned over to Darnley, and Bothwell is evasive, so Mary confronts him in a tavern. Mary learns of an English traveler using forged papers, and James finds Darnley with Kira and threatens him that if he betrays Mary again, James will kill him. Mary receives another loyal watchman letter and confronts Darnley. She tries to call off the wedding, and Darnley manipulates her by dangling England as the prize. Mary warns that if she marries him, it will never be a real marriage, and she will never forgive him. In France, Lisa drafts an abdication letter for Charles to clear the way for Spain. Catherine and Narcisse find Charles living peacefully with a village family and refuses to return. And this is when they use Nicole, to lure him back. Under pressure, Charles refuses to abdicate and claims he's converted to Protestantism, threatening to ignite civil war. Lisa leaves France to involve King Philip and demands Catherine replace Charles with Henry, setting brother against brother. In episode 8, it's time for Mary and Darnley's wedding. And a very influential person for Mary's English claim, named Luke Medici, arrives in Scotland, and she overhears Darnley insulting Francis and Mary very crudely, and it pisses Luke off. Mary has to settle things very quickly, so she decides to offer Luke some lands. She goes out to a man named Davies' land, and she discovers Bothwell there. Bothwell claims that it is his land, and he will only sell it to her if she takes a private boat ride with him to survey the land so that he can get a good asking price for it. They take a private boat ride, and it turns into like a forced isolation situation when the river floods, and Mary realizes that he manipulated the situation to get her alone, and he reveals the truth. He is their loyal watchman, and he's been protecting her, and he actually worked with Marie de Guise before she passed. A prophecy messenger arrives while they are alone, a man by the name of Rizzo, and he tells Mary that she will either love or have an heir, not both, and her heir will rule all, meaning they will unite England and Scotland. The messenger claims a man fitting Bash's description guided him, suggesting that Bash may be dead. In the previous season, Bash went off to work with the Druids. Mary learns that Darnley never stopped seeing Kira, and she orders Kira removed, but Kira is injured and falls into a coma. Bothwell gives Luke the land that Mary promised, and Mary finds Darnley at Kira's bedside. Darnley insists Kira is only there because she is ill, and then tells Mary that he will hate her forever if Kira dies. In France, Nicole subtly pushes Charles back toward stability and Catholic duty, but Lisa's pressure remains. The episode ends with Mary reuniting with Catherine and begging Catherine's help to end her engagement to Darnley. In episode 9, Mary and Catherine plot to end the engagement and make Darnley take the blame, but Darnley's mother works to sway Scottish nobles to Darnley's side. Bothwell proposes they get together and have children, they kiss, and Mary runs to Catherine and reveals she's pregnant with Darnley's child. Catherine warns her to tell no one. James learns Darnley is planning a secret duel tied to Kira's marriage, and Catherine corners Lady Lennox and wins information by outmaneuvering her. This scene is hilarious because it's literally two women that talk the exact same way and scheme the exact same way, like going at each other, and Catherine manages to best her, but it's a very funny scene. Rizzo offers intel through Vatican connections, and Mary interrupts a meeting where the Vatican has been offering Darnley money and influence. She humiliates the cardinal and forces Darnley away, and the Vatican threatens to withdraw backing in key border towns. On wedding day, Darnley is drunk and cruel, and Mary tries to offer forgiveness, but Darnley rejects her again, and she marries him anyway. 12 border lands switch allegiances to Scotland because Catherine melts down jewels to bribe and stabilize them. Episode 10, Darnley plans his coronation while Mary avoids their bed. Mary brings Lord Hamilton to court, a Protestant power player with a claim to the Scottish throne, and because Hamilton is essential to the English claim, but threatens Darnley. Emily Knox trades information that Hamilton and Knox plot to kill Mary before the coronation. James rushes Mary and Greer out, but Hamilton intercepts them, and a fight breaks out. All of Hamilton's men die, and Hamilton is gravely injured. He claims Knox warned them that Mary was trying to kill them. Hamilton dies, and Mary risks losing Protestant support. James offers to take the blame and accepts banishment. Darnley appears more composed, proposes a small coronation, and vows to protect Mary and their child. And in France, Catherine tries to prevent civil war by pushing Charles toward abdication and disappearance, not execution. Nicole refuses to keep helping Narcisse, claiming she's done, and a Protestant hostage crisis ends with Charles sending troops, saving hostages, and briefly smiling for the first time all season. He really is not doing well in the beginning of the season. In this episode, at the end of this episode, Henry, Charles's brother, and the person that Spain is backing to be king, arrives in France, but he kind of plays harmless, like he plays like he has no intention of trying to overthrow Charles, but we do see him sitting on the throne smirking, which is just like the show's favorite way of saying that someone's like grasping for power. In episode 11, Mary learns that Elizabeth is engaged to Archduke Ferdinand of Austria, a Catholic match that weakens Mary's claim. Mary and Darnley plan an invasion with Spain's backing, and Mary gives Darnley's allies her royal seal as proof of commitment, putting herself at risk if they turn. Bothwell returns to court and clashes with Darnley, and Darnley banishes Bothwell, and Mary allows it. Darnley pushes again for the crown matrimonial and threatens Mary with her own seal and the safety of England and the baby. Mary meets Bothwell privately and asks him to stop the English invasion and seek Blackburn's help. Mary destroys the crown matrimonial document in front of Darnley and the council, and Bothwell retrieves Mary's seal and forces Darnley's men out of the mission. Mary makes Bothwell her bodyguard and Rizzo her advisor and tries to end her relationship with Darnley, but he again threatens to claim that the child isn't his. In France, Henry needles Charles and builds power through Spain, and Catherine threatens Henry with heresy accusations and uses magic to protect Charles. In episode 12, a Scottish village collapses, and Mary tries to secure relief funds, but Ruthven and other council members question mismanagement of funds and speculate that it is caused by her, and Knox exploits the suffering of the people to convert them against Mary and to Protestantism. Darnley steals jewels and drains Scotland's money, forcing Mary into political crises. Rizzo confirms the council will see Scotland as too weak if the crown appears broke. So Mary stages a party for Darnley while she and Bothwell attempt to reclaim and hide crown funds in a church. Darnley ends up catching on, and the gold is mostly gone by the time Bothwell gets there. Rizzo discovers Darnley is buying property and influence by bribing the nobles, and Mary visits Bothwell in prison, and Bothwell urges her to kill Darnley. Darnley meets Knox, and Knox agrees to invest in Scotland if Mary is removed. And in France, Charles swings from confidence to instability. He arrests nobles, then returns their heads on pikes, and Henry steps in publicly and wins the nobles over, humiliating Charles. Episode 13, Henry starts seizing English ships and their cargo for taxes, and Blackburn arrives in France to negotiate and threatens military action if they don't return the English ships and cargo. Henry runs to Spain and claims the cargo is gunpowder, which Spain wants, and Narcisse tells Blackburn to seek Charles directly. Blackburn persuades Charles to stop Henry from handing cargo to Spain, avoiding full-out war. Blackburn returns ships and cargo to England, and Charles confronts Henry, and Henry kind of acquiesces, but it's clear that he's not done. In Scotland, Darnley's bribery becomes clear. He's paying off Privy Council to block Mary and to push a vote for the crown matrimonial. Mary announces her pregnancy to force Darnley into acknowledging paternity, and Knox and Ruthven pressure Darnley toward removing Mary. Darnley tries to shift to an adultery trial against Mary and Bothwell instead of all-out execution. The council spirals into violence in their attempts to get Mary off the throne. They don't catch her with Bothwell, so they basically accuse Rizzo of being her lover, and they murder Rizzo in a fit of violence and take Mary hostage. Mary manages to convince Darnley that Knox is just using him and will eventually murder him as well, so they escape together and Darnley abandons her in the woods. Mary reaches a loyal state with Bothwell in support of nobles, and she vows to retake the castle at dawn and kill the conspirators. In episode 14, Mary retakes the castle with an army because most of the conspiracies have fled, and Ruthven is caught and hanged. 2 months later, Knox warns Mary the council is rebuilding and Knox is not her biggest threat. Darnley is still the central problem. He helps her turn over a co-conspirator and claims he's changed, wanting to be a father, but Mary plans to use him to locate the remaining conspirators and then arrest him. Darnley plays both sides, going to the co-conspirators to claim that Elizabeth is offering them safe passage. He sets up a meeting at a meeting house later on in which he burns to the ground and blames Knox for. Mary and Bothwell don't buy his claim that Knox burned the building down, so they have him imprisoned. Mary panics, forgives Darnley, and breaks up with Bothwell, again attempting to make her marriage work. And Lady Lennox visits Darnley. Darnley admits he burned the Privy Council at Kira's request, so he and Kira can be together. Remember that Kira is a ghost at this point. So in France, Charles proposes to Nicole publicly, trying to make her queen and enraging Spain's faction, who has been trying to set him up with a Spanish queen. In episode 15, Lisa returns to France to interrogate Charles's marriage, and she brings French heretics in a cage as a grotesque bonding gift. They can bond over their killings. Lisa and Henry plot to win the throne for Henry by Spanish forces in the ports. Nicole flips to Henry's side on the condition that Charles is not harmed, and Henry and Nicole flee to the Spanish ship, and Charles imprisons Lisa. Catherine receives word from King Philip that Spain's fleet is needed for an attack on England, so support for Henry's coup is withdrawn, and Lisa begs Catherine for escape, and Catherine agrees for a price. Charles refuses to spare Henry, believing that Nicole was kidnapped, and Catherine turns to dark magic again. Basically sets up a witch to have Nicole killed. In Scotland, Mary lifts James' banishment and names him regent if anything were to happen to her. Darnley is clearly ill, and Mary suspects syphilis and sends him away. She goes into a dangerous labor and insists the baby be saved over her, and she survives and delivers a son. Mary discovers that Darnley and Lady Lennox have filled council seats without her and are pushing to make Darnley the baby's steward, sidelining Mary and removing any power that she has over her child's life. Mary writes to Elizabeth offering abdication terms in exchange for protection of her son and recognition of him as Elizabeth's heir. Darnley, aided by Kira's influence, kidnaps the baby. In episode 16 and the last episode of the season, Narcisse returns to France and tells Catherine about Mary's crisis. Henry and Nicole remain on the Spanish ship awaiting for the fleet, but supplies run low and Nicole dies after a meal, likely poisoned by circumstance or sabotage, that Catherine set up, and Henry brings her body back. Charles believes that Henry murdered her, but Catherine convinces Charles and Henry to work together against Spain. Catherine and Narcisse consult that witch, Emmanuel, drugs Catherine and Narcisse, and tries to summon the devil, warning Catherine that her sons will fail, blame her, and die unless Catherine brings her daughter Margot home. In Scotland, the search for the baby falls, until Darnley is found half dead after following Kira's hallucinated guidance. Mary holds a naming ceremony and names the baby James after James, her brother, was the one that rescued the baby, and Bothwell argues the council could be swayed if Darnley is gone. Mary and Bothwell plan Darnley's murder, and Mary orders Bothwell to kill him. Bothwell sets Darnley's house on fire while Mary hosts the council to give her an alibi, but the explosives that they use fail, and when Bothwell goes into the house to investigate, the house ignites, the house blows up, and Darnley survives, stumbles out, and Bothwell kills him by hand. Elizabeth receives Mary's letter, calls off her own wedding, and vows to rule alone, naming James as her heir, and Knox moves to arrest Bothwell with a guard as a witness, claiming that he watched Bothwell assassinate Darnley. The last 10 minutes of this season, this series, this episode, whatever, the last 10 minutes of reign. The story jumps forward 21 years. Mary and Bothwell are arrested, they're in prison, and Mary prepares for her execution. James is now older and the heir to Scotland and England, and he is begging Elizabeth to stop his mother's execution. However, Elizabeth refuses, and James gets word to Mary that the execution will not be stopped. At the last moment, the show ends on a dreamlike memory. Mary waking beside Francis, reliving their love, and closing the series in fantasy rather than mercy. That's the whole show. That's the whole shebang. We've talked about all of it. We've gone through all of it. Like I said, obviously, I shortened a lot of the plot lines because the last 2 seasons, are kind of irrelevant. So, that not a lot happens. But I thought it would be fun to talk about what we actually know about history, not just about Elizabeth, but some of the facts of history, some of the things that actually happened. First up, Bash is an entirely made-up character and is fictional, and so was Clarissa, Catherine's illegitimate daughter from the first season. Francis did not have any children with any of Mary's ladies-in-waiting, and Mary and Francis actually met when they were 10 years before the start of the show. Mary was 5 years old when she was sent to France to spend the next 13 years at French court rather than at a convent. Okay, well, my phone died, or my camera died, so we're gonna wrap up like this. Mary was accompanied to French court by her 2 illegitimate half-brothers and 4 Marys, 4 girls who were her own age, all named Mary, who were the daughters of some of the noblest families in Scotland. Mary, Queen of Scots, and Francis were married when they were 16 and 14 years old, respectively. Francis died just 2 years and 8 months after his wedding with Mary, and after the death of Francis, Mary wed 2 more times, and she only had 1 child with her second husband. Historically, Mary was also sentenced to death not for her part in her husband's murder, but for a plot against Queen Elizabeth of England, and Mary was sentenced to death in 1587 in Fotheringhay Castle. Fotheringhay Castle, I think. So I guess I can give my closing thoughts on the show. I had a ton of fun rewatching this. When I was a kid, I only watched up until Francis died, so the latter half of season 3 and all of season 4 was brand new to me. And I had a ton of fun checking the historical facts behind this. Admittedly, my special interest right now is history, specifically antiquity, which would not involve this, but it was tons of fun, looking up what actually happened, what didn't happen, all that kind of stuff. So if you ask me if I would recommend this show to you, I definitely think it's a typical CW show where we basically all just know that we're there to see hot people kiss, and they certainly didn't focus on any of the historical accuracies or worry about people's perception of their storylines. I mean, Anna as a character just completely vanishes in the 3rd season, and they never mention it at all. Like I said before, the show definitely goes downhill after Francis died, and it's immediately obvious. And honestly, aside from Mary and Francis, there weren't too many romances to get deeply invested in. They mostly lasted a couple of episodes and then ended. And after Francis, all of Mary's romances in particular feel half-baked and very same. I mean, you could blindfold me and I would not be able to tell the difference between Blackburn and Bothwell. Let's not even go back to the way that they absolutely butchered Elizabeth's character and sideswiped any potential that she could have had. But despite those two main gripes, the show is fun, it's dramatic, it's spicy, and visually it's absolutely beautiful. If you enjoy the frivolous and the dramatic shows like Pretty Little Liars or Vampire Diaries, I think you will eat this show up, and I would highly recommend. I'm assuming if you've gotten to the end, you've watched the show, maybe back when you were a teen or recently. I don't know. I'm assuming you've watched it, but if you haven't watched it recently, I would recommend a reread or a rewatch. But I would love to talk down in the comments, like your thoughts. I want to know who was your favorite romance. Was Francis the death of the show? Because I certainly think that he was. Don't forget to subscribe if you're looking for more videos like this from me. Thanks so much for watching, and I will catch you guys in my next one.